Someday we might all be in the unfortunate position of being asked, how was America lost? Where was it that we went wrong? What was it that did not stop the slipping away of our liberty and our freedoms? And I want to, again, use a snapshot from history to show what happened in Germany in 1935, because I believe it's applicable to today once again. And this gentleman who's being interviewed was a chemical engineer, he worked at a defense plant. He was a pretty prominent person in that society. He was educated. He had some kind of status. And this is taken from a book called They Thought They Were Free, written by Milton Mayer. And again, he went to Germany and interviewed 10 average Germans after the war to see what was going on in Germany at that time that allowed Hitler to come to power. So the book isn't so much about Hitler and all the atrocities that we know about, but it's more about the mindset of the people that allowed Hitler to come to power. So he wanted to know. He asked of this gentleman, how was the world lost? How was Germany lost? And he said it was pretty simple. The world was lost one day in 1935, and it was I who lost it. And the interviewer was like, you got to be kidding me. You alone, you lost the world? And he just told him to hang on a minute and let me explain. And his explanation was this. He was employed at a defense plant, and it was the year that the National Defense Law was enacted. And under this law, he was required to take an oath of fidelity to the Third Reich. So he said he wouldn't take it because he opposed it in his conscience. He just didn't think he couldn't, pledge his allegiance to Hitler and the Nazi Party. And they gave him 24 hours to think about it. And as he says, in those 24 hours, I lost the world. And the thing was, if he had refused to take the oath, it meant the loss of his job. Now, this was 1935, so he wouldn't have gone to prison, and he wouldn't have been arrested or anything like that. But he would have lost his job, and he wouldn't have been able to get another because they would have asked him, well, why'd you leave your last job? And he would have had to tell them, because I couldn't take the oath of fidelity. And then he would have been labeled a Bolshevik, a communist, and he would never get a job again, and he wouldn't be able to, provide for his family. The next day, after thinking it over, he said that he would take the oath. He got there, and they swore him in, and they said, do you understand what you're doing? And he told the guy that he had some kind of mental reservation, but they weren't interested. They just wanted to know, will you take the oath? And he took it. And by his admission, he said that day the world was lost, and it was I who lost it. And the interviewer, again, didn't understand because this gentleman had later on used his apartment to hide fugitives until his arrest in 1943. So he was hiding fugitives from the Reich in his apartment, and he had saved, some people's lives. And the guy said, well, look, you did a good thing. If you hadn't taken that oath, you wouldn't have been able to save those 5 people's lives, or however many he saved. And he went into another explanation. He said, look, how many people were killed in Nazi Germany? And they talked about 6 million Jews and the ultimate millions that were killed. And this is interesting because then he goes into an explanation. This is the beginning of his explanation. He talks about the lesser of two evils. Now, these are his terms. And I'll read. Of course, I must explain. First of all, there's the problem of the lesser evil. Taking the oath was not so evil as being unable to help my friends later on would have been. But the evil of the oath was certain and immediate, and the helping of my friends was in the future and therefore uncertain. I had to commit a positive evil there and then in the hope of a possible good later on. The good outweighed the evil, but the good was only a hope, the evil a fact. So then the other gentleman goes, but, I said, the hope was realized. You were able to help your friends. Yes, he said, but you must concede that the hope might not have been realized, either for reasons beyond my control or because I became afraid later on, or even because I was afraid all the time and was simply fooling myself when I took the oath in the first place. But that is not the important point. The problem of the lesser evil we all know about. In Germany, we took Hindenburg as less evil than Hitler, and in the end, we got them both. But that is not why I say that Americans cannot understand. No, the important point is, how many innocent people were killed by the Nazis? 6 million Jews, and then he goes on, well, even at this time, he's saying, well, that may be an exaggeration. So the Germans themselves weren't even clear about how many people were killed. And he goes on to ask the man, well, how many innocent lives would you like to say I saved? Well, he said, perhaps 5 or 10, one doesn't know. But shall we say 100 or 1,000 just to be safe? And it would be better to have saved all 3 million instead of 100,000, of course. Then is my point. If I had refused to take the oath of fidelity, I would have saved all 3 million. You're joking. No. You don't mean to tell me that your refusal would have overthrown the regime in 1935. No. Or that others would have followed your example. No. I don't understand. And then here he says, there I was in 1935, a perfect example of the kind of person who, with all his advantages in birth and education and in position, rules or might easily rule in any country. If I had refused to take the oath in 1935, it would have meant that thousands and thousands like me all over Germany were refusing to take it. Their refusal would have heartened millions. Thus, the regime would have been overthrown or, indeed, would never have come to power in the first place. The fact that I was not prepared to resist in 1935 meant that all the thousands, hundreds of thousands like me in Germany were also unprepared. And each one of these hundreds of thousands was, like me, a man of great influence or of great potential influence. Thus, the world was lost. You're serious, I said. Completely, he said. These 100 lives I saved, or 1,000 or 10 as you will, what do they represent? A little something out of the whole terrible evil. When if my faith had been strong enough in 1935, I could have prevented the whole evil. Your faith? My faith. I did not believe that I could remove mountains. The day I said no, I had faith. In the process of thinking it over, in the next 24 hours, my faith failed me. So in the next 10 years, I was able to remove only anthills, not mountains. So, you see, people of prominence, people who have a following, there's thousands, potentially millions of people watching these folks. And when they don't find the courage to resist, when they choose the lesser evil, thousands and perhaps millions look at them and do the same thing. And I bring this up because I have two examples, and I'm going to pull them just from one website right now, but you could probably find your own. Any political pundit has an article like this. The first one that I ever came in contact with like this was actually back in 2004 when George Bush was running against John Kerry and Michael Peruka was the Constitution Party candidate. And Joseph Farah of WorldNet Daily actually had Michael Peruka on his radio show he had at the time. And that was kind of encouraging to see a guy come out and, at least allow Michael Peruka to be heard, for his ideas to be heard, which is all any candidate can ask for, is their ideas to be heard by the people who need to hear them. But that August, David Capellion, who was he was one of the editors of WorldNet Daily at the time, and I assume that he still is, he came out and wrote this article, Voting Your Conscience, in this November. And so it's really just a long diatribe about how, basically he's going to choose the lesser evil because he has to, because it's too risky to have John Kerry, and he goes through all these different reasons. But so here's my point. You can look it up at yourself. It's called Voting Your Conscience this November, and it's on WorldNet Daily. So my point is this. David Capellion, at the time, you would have figured, WorldNet Daily gets millions of visitors a month. He would have had people following his columns, I'm sure. He had a chance to do the right thing, because he admits throughout his article that George Bush's pretty much the globalist that everyone thinks he is, that he's not the best candidate, but like once again, he's lesser evil than John Kerry. But here's the point further. George Bush went on to appoint John Roberts to the Supreme Court. Now, these are always the reasons we're given that we need to put Republicans in office, because, after all, they get to appoint Supreme Court justices if they're in office at the time. But you're all aware at this point that it's John Roberts who gave us Obamacare. Perhaps, had David Kupelian and others at the time said, you know what, neither one of these candidates are any good. We can't have either one, and got behind a true constitutional candidate, good chance right now we would not have Obamacare. Good chance. Better than good chance, I would say. So we are reaping the results of a man's weakness back in 2004. He saw that George Bush was not a good candidate. All that he saw was that maybe he was a little better than John Kerry. But in the end, just like the man in Germany, America picked one, but they got both, because John Kerry didn't go away. John Kerry stayed in the Senate. So we still got both men. We chose one evil, and we got them both. Let's fast forward a little bit here to Joseph Farah's column just a few days ago. And even in 2008, Joseph Farah wrote a book called None of the Above, where he basically laid out the fact that John McCain was a bad candidate, and he was only if he won, that he would only solidify the Republican Party as a non-viable party. But I would argue that the fact that John McCain was their candidate in 2008, and everybody did not, I mean, in the beginning, nobody really wanted him. I'm not even sure how he got up there. Obviously, Republicans chose him. So for him to use that as an argument, I think is kind of weak, because the fact that they chose him proves that they're a non-viable party. And so here we are again in 2012, and he acknowledges that he wrote the book in 2008 called None of the Above, and that he just said don't choose anybody because he figured Barack Obama would actually make the Republican Party alive again, because there would be such a groundswell of support against Obama that it would reinvigorate a constitutional, movement. But so here we are, and he's saying now that he is going to vote for, yikes, Mitt Romney. And he goes on to explain why. Again, it's the same claptrap that you see, making an excuse for taking an easy way out rather than standing up and saying, I will not vote for this man. Because Mr. Farah, I will say at this time, the fact that Mitt Romney is at the top of the Republican ticket proves that they're not a viable party for any constitutionalist to choose. It proves it. There's no contrast between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. They're the same guy. So they have the same record. Republicans right now in the Tea Party and all these folks, they're mad at Barack Obama basically because he got Romneycare passed. But here once again, you have Joseph Farah, a site that gets millions of views. You would think that these same millions read his columns and take into serious consideration what he says. What if Joseph Farah said, you know what, I'm not going to take the easy way out the way the men did in 1935. I'm going to look at the example of 1935, and I'm going to say to myself, I can't not let myself be that man. Who wants to be the guy that sits there night after night when he lays his head on the pillow knowing that had he taken a stand, he could have saved millions? No, I don't think anybody, I don't even know how you could wake up in the morning with that on your conscience. But had Joseph Farah here in 2012, if he would just stand up and say, you know what, I changed my mind. I cannot go through and cast a vote for Mitt Romney. Because again, if we choose from the lesser of the two evils, is Mitt Romney going away? No, he's not going anywhere. He'll be in the Republican Party and to meddle, to wreck whatever he can get his hands on. So, I mean, Mitt Romney, is a Democrat, basically. And the Republicans right now are justifying voting for him. Joseph Farah is justifying voting for Mitt Romney. Please stop. Mr. Farah, please just stand up and say, I will not allow myself to choose somebody who does not reflect my conscience. It's a direct violation of your conscience. I know it is. I've read your columns. I've read many of your, and I've connected with many of your columns over the years. So I want to point out one last thing. Martin Luther said, while standing in front of an inquisition, he was asked to recant his writings, to recant what he believed in his heart was true. And the man stood up there and said, I cannot recant. To go against conscience is neither right nor safe. Here I stand, I can do no other. Listen, if we can get men like you, Mr. Farah, and other men and women who have a following to stand up and finally say, this is the time to stand on our principles, not violate them. Mr. Farah, we won't have to answer the question, how was America lost? Instead, we could say, you know what? There was guys like Joe Farah. There was guys like Capellion. There was guys like, put your name that you want to in there. We had these men and they stood up. And I can tell you there's only one guy that I can see right now who's going around and speaking out that these two men cannot be voted on. We can't choose from these lesser of two evils, and that's Alan Keyes. Now, I disagree with Alan Keyes on several issues, but I know he's a strong pro-life advocate. And this man is not being quiet about voting for the lesser of two evils. He just wrote a column on, and I believe it's on WorldNet Daily, called "The Choice Between Satan and Beelzebub," and you need to look that up. And if you go on YouTube and search for his Rally for Common Sense speech that they had up here in Missouri, he again speaks outwardly to the Tea Party about both of these two men are the same guy. So there is at least one man out there going around, and there's others, but they need to be given an ear. You need to hear their reasons. And I would just say, we don't want to be the generation that has to answer the question, how was America lost? So I would encourage you, whoever hears this, I would encourage you to share this with your friends. Whatever you can do, we have to break through that mentality and get away from this. We have to choose the lesser of two evils. It doesn't work. It has never worked. Germany is a glaring example. Let's not make the same mistake that the citizens of Germany made. Let's stand up, let's stand on our principles, and let's fight for America.